would be good.
It'll turn red. It means you're talking. Or you're on. If you touch it again.
Mike, call this joint meeting of the Lewiston School Committee and the Lewiston City Council to order for Monday, March 21st of 2022. Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The next item on the agenda for those here in attendance and also for the viewing audience is introductions of the folks in attendance. We'll start with our student rep and come right around the table.
Hello, I am Omar Osman. I'm a senior at Lewiston High School, and I'm the senior rep for the committee.
Good evening, Karen Paquette, Assistant Superintendent.
Heather Hunter, Lewiston City Administrator.
Megan Parks at large.
Bob McCarthy, Ward 2 City Councilor.
Janet Bowden, Ward 2 School Committee.
Scott Harriman, Ward 3 City Councilor.
Elizabeth Ames, Ward 3 School Committee.
Carl Schilling, the Mayor of Lewiston.
I'm Jake Langlis, Superintendent.
I'm Bruce Damon, Ward 1.
Tanya Whitlow, Ward 4.
Rick Lachapelle, Ward 4, City Council.
Larry Pease, Ward 5 City Council.
Ashley Medina, Ward 5 School Committee.
Megan Hurd, Ward 6 School Committee.
Lee Clement, Ward 6, City Council and Council President.
Paul Popelant, Ward 7 School Committee.
Stephanie Jelinas, Ward 7 City Councilor.
Linda Scott, Ward 1 City Councilor and City Council Representative on the School Committee.
Thank you, everyone. The third item on the agenda for tonight is a school budget workshop between the school committee and the city council. And I'll turn it over to Superintendent English.
So we're going to start this evening with just a quick highlight of each of the articles. Our school budgets are broken down by articles, and we will go sequentially in order 1 through 11 and share a little bit about what's in each one and just some highlights of note. We'll also mention or talk about adult education, which does not by rule land in our articles, but does land in our budget. We will then talk about some things that the school committee has already done in the work that we have. We began back February 28th with some precursors, and then started the 2nd of March, I believe was our first meeting, where we did introductions, talked about our goals. And we have had meetings twice per week since then to go through each of our articles. We've identified numerous reductions and corrections, which we'll share with you this evening. And what we'd like to do is, as we work through, is if you have questions about particular articles or areas, please ask anytime you wish. I would just ask that you run them through the chair, and we will answer all the questions that you can come up with. In the meantime, we'll also give you an opportunity at the end if we bypass something or maybe we didn't touch on it, but it's something that you want to ask about, we can always do that at the end. Really looking to go through an overview, share things openly, be as transparent as we can, and go through some things. I do want to start with a question that Councillor McCarthy had asked about the actuals for 18-19. You got a new sheet passed out to you. The actuals for 18-19 were actually corrected. And so that goes back some time, but there was a correction in that reporting using our Munis system. It had omitted some pretty significant items. If you look in Article 1 and 2 on that sheet from the 18-19 year that were corrected.
Ms. Bowden.
Sorry to interrupt. On the way in, I saw a friendly face and said hello to somebody and realized they were here for public comment tonight. And I see that that's not in the agenda. So I just wanted to point out that there are people here for public comment and perhaps we should tell them when public comment will be the next meeting. Doesn't look like it's on tonight's agenda. So I just wanted to clarify that before we started, so they don't sit through the whole budget meeting and realize they can't speak.
Yeah, this is scheduled as a workshop. This is not a public meeting per se. They're welcome to stay and hear what we're going to do, but there is no public comment at this time. Yes, there's a published agenda. The agenda was published on the city website previous. If you'd like to see an agenda, or okay. We'll continue.
So I'm going to start off with just a brief overview, trying to hit some highlights of things. And so across the entire book, you'll see salary and benefits increases. Those are contract or contractual steps. Insurance projections. We budgeted this year at 12% for insurance. We find out what the max is next week. That will help guide our next steps with insurance. We budget at 12% because it's a conservative medium number. But the way that plays out is we get a max from MEA Benefits Trust. Again, those come in usually late on the 24th. We should know by Friday if that number will exceed 12%, which it could, or be lower than the 12%, and we will adjust accordingly with what that number is. We don't have control of it. Every percent below 12% is $119,000 off the budget. And we've already given a projection of a 9%. So there's already a reduction here connected to that, but we don't know that for certainty until later this week. But the steps and contracts that have been collectively bargained and insurance projections from last year to this year is $7.4 million. We're making concerted efforts to improve special education for some time, at least from my own perspective as an educator or principal at multiple schools and now superintendent. We've had some serious deficiencies in special education that impact our community and our families, and we're seeking to correct that this year. And we're doing so through some different means, and I'll explain those. There's a number of article or budget coding corrections. So there may be things that come up that you have fair questions about, like, why is this, for instance, up 128,000? And that's a specific example, and it's around an athletic director and an assistant being placed inappropriately in the article with some salary components and another piece for after-school detention. So there's some contractual pieces, there's extra time hours, but there was also some salaries buried in this. We had to move those to correct them, and you'll see things like that. I clicked, I'm just waiting for it to go. There we go. So just continued, we have 1,434 active employees. So I just got a total, but those active employees, those include substitutes, some of whom may not have taken a job this year at all, but they are on our rolls. So we have 1,434. So to try to narrow that field, just to give you a sense of our numbers, we have 994 full-time employees as of our latest poll of data. So that's every employee of the district, minus our bus drivers. As a reminder, that's a contracted service. They're not actually our bus drivers. We've cut 35 positions from last year to this year, and about half of those were repurposed for improvements. And we'll talk about the breakdown of that. We've also reduced the budget by over $2 million already, and we continue to work. I don't think this committee feels that their work is complete yet. So the numbers you're looking at today are where we're at and looking for both your input, your questions, and some direction for our next steps. To give you an example, here's 1.959 million of the reductions that we went through recently. And you can see a quick breakdown, that first number being that insurance estimate, the main care seed, which is an actual. Cameras, it's a multi-year item in facilities that we've reduced. This year's number was 240. Next year was going to be around the same. Equipment, that's established as various. We believe we can find that money in other areas, including technology and facilities. We reduced some funding in training. It was in around attending a safety conference. We believe we can do the same work, but without attending that training. Some curriculum savings. There's an item here for benefits that ties back to our ELL staff. We reduced there, and that's what that $90,000 is. We had some summer supplies for, these are not necessarily summer school, but our more shorter duration summer components that had supplies to them at about 46,000. Local entitlement, this is a transition of how we pay for what things, and this is a goal to maximize the funds that we do have coming to us here in Lewiston. But when we put staff in local entitlement, we pay 16% more in their benefits than we would if we put them locally. The good news is we have that much in expenditure elsewhere that we can move to that space. So it saves us just in cost of benefits. So that's a significant reduction just by working smarter. Substitutes, looking at a trend, we have underspent that substitute line, and we believe that $50,000 is a safe reduction. But I'll be clear and upfront, that's often due to our inability to fill some of the spots and not necessarily because it's inadequately funded. So we'll keep an eye on that. And then additional special education reductions. We'll talk about some restructuring, and we talked about all the positions. So some of the new positions pay for things that we're looking to do by way of moving those funds. The rest of them results in just straight personnel-wise, $615,000 worth of reductions. I know many of you for several years now have heard about our audits and the work that we've done around special education, both structurally with our IEPs and our staffing patterns. And so we've read those, listened to those, researched them with our community partners, which had a number of concerns that we're trying to improve, but also parents and our students. And so there's a lot of cost savings potential there. So that's what that 615 is. And there are other components to that, but I want to break it down in a sheet to show you. Some notable items not included. I had just this one slide on this. I could have done 10. I think there's notable items to somebody somewhere in our organization, both big and small, that are not included, but some key things I wanted to share with you. Summer school. So your traditional summer school for additional help or for credit recovery, those kinds of remediation things that run in the summer, but not special ed. That is not in this budget. We did put special education back in this budget. That was $142,000 add back that was cut last year. And so we really need to have that back in to provide the special education summer school is dictated by IEPs. So students get an IEP saying you require additional extended school year services, they call it. And so last year we cut that and we used some ESSER funds, and those ESSER funds have a time frame on them. So we're looking to put that piece back, but regular summer school is out of this budget. We continue to seek alternative funding for that, grants and reallocations. So we're hopeful that we can still have it. Social emotional learning, we have building staff in our schools that we've used emergency funds for. Every single school that has a staff that's doing this work now and helping kids and keeping kids in class accessing education, every single school has said we want to keep this. From the teachers to the administration, everyone wants to keep those. They're funded with federal dollars. They stayed there. I don't see how this year we can put it in our general fund. Large scale mechanical upgrades. So this is not something you've seen extracted from Article 9. These are things that would otherwise be in like LCIP or Article 9. We have a lot of federal dollars we're using to upgrade our facilities because it's permissible to do so. And I'd like to use those funds instead of asking for funds from the immediate local fund, excuse me. 25% of supplies, books, and periodicals. And this goes back to the 2020 requested levels. So mind you, we're in FY23 or talking about FY23. So this is a 3-year gap in requested levels. And that 3-year gap has been created by COVID, emergency funding, and people using those funds. It's contributed in a number of ways. We have some fund balance that we talk about. Some of that fund balance has really been generated by the use of federal dollars to do this. The problem that we have is we look at the pending, if you had it on a graph, when these funds are going to sunset and that need for teacher supplies and books intersect, somehow we have to have built back in some of this cost. Otherwise, we'll have classroom teachers and no supplies for them to work with. So we put money back in this budget, you'll see those, but 25% of what was moved out of it last year still remains in federal funding because we have federal funding that sunsets down the road. So now we jump into just articles, and I have highlights for you. I have found it to be beneficial to look at really 2 different places. The first one being the sheet that was passed out today that gives you just by article changes year to year. I think that's a good tool. The other one is, I don't know which tab in yours. I think it's the same as ours, but tab G. Tab G is more of that, the level of detail that is more by line. And just for conversational purposes, could everyone turn to tab G? I just want to share what that looks like. So if you're in tab G, all the way to the left, you see numbers. That first column of numbers, every line has a number. So if you have a question about line 27, and instead of people trying to find what that thing is or what page, you can just say line 27, and it gives us the opportunity for all of us to go right to that line and give that a look, just so you have an idea of how we reference things. If you've seen meetings and you hear us say, well, go to line 1126, we're all kind of going right to it because they're numbered sequentially. Okay. In Article 1, some highlights, salary and benefits increases. You'll hear me say that a lot. ESSER, ESSER is our federal funds for COVID, one of the pockets. So that's when you hear me say ESSER, I'm talking about COVID funds. So there's supplies, again, returning to it, but still a number of supplies staying in ESSER. We also had a correction. National board certified teachers, by way of contract, get a stipend. In the past, that was buried in salary lines. And so when I was asking questions, we went through the process of why this salary is this and this salary is that, we had to mine down even further to find things like stipends or hourly wages for extra duties. And I wanted to know salary numbers. So if we did other reductions, what the impact would be. So we pulled those apart. You also have grant positions that are allocated locally. And then our next step, which is one of our pathways toward graduation, we're looking to make their, to give a little more staff on the bench, if you will. So to add 2 instructors in EdTech. Further down in Article 2, we look to add a special education instructor there. So those are the highlights of from Article 1. Article 1 is regular instruction. It's our biggest article. Article 2 is special education. And we have reorganization of positions, ed text to teacher, new programming. Again, we'll talk a little more about that. Easter supplies going back in that were taken out. Special education summer school back in. I put 140 on the slide, it's 142. And that's that new next step special education teacher.
Mr. Beaupont.
Can you give us a page number on that or a reference to the big book?
Sure can. I'm hearing 650. $658. Do you have this? Are they bill, Mr. Grant? Are their numbers going to align exactly? Okay, thank you. City Council has an updated book because we put notes through ours, and I just want to make sure the same lines.
Yeah.
It may be off by just a few because of corrections, so. All right. So that touches on Article 2, special education. But this is where I want to go more full picture with Article 2. What we're doing in special education this year is something that's not been done. It's directly as a result of talking to people, as I mentioned, our community, our families, our staff, our partners that we work with, but also really looking at the audits and trying to figure out what's a way that we can get better. And so we've made a number of transitions that have also led to significant reductions, as I mentioned, 35 positions. But of those 35 positions, about half are used in a matrix of how we can program better, but also use the rest as a savings. So in budgets, we always get into this conversation of what's an expenditure, which is like the item we budget that we have to pay for. What's a revenue? What money comes in? What things are not as an expenditure because, well, if we don't spend that money but it's also not a revenue, is it just a savings? How do you reflect that? So the phrase, I believe it was Adam that used it first, that a cost avoided is a savings. And so part of what I'd like to do is work through this chart one line at a time, but I want you to note the column to the right that says where. So this is the work we're doing to try to be as dynamic as we can to add value back to our school system and our community to make special education better than it is. Because we have some serious concerns and these are steps we want to take to make it better. The question is, how do we do that? And so if you look at the first item, it says local entitlement. I mentioned that number earlier, 140, 142. And so that number lands in here. That's a local article adjustment. So moving those positions, saving that 16%, that's money that stays here. Main care billing, a conservative estimate of this. What we found is we are not billing for services that we are eligible to bill for full reimbursement or partial reimbursement. Section 28, Section 65, and some other areas. The reason we're not doing that is we don't have the capacity. So by adding a piece or two, we shift that capacity and it brings $400,000 of revenue to our district. That's a conservative estimate. Whenever I talk about revenues or money coming in, I'm extremely tight on it. And when I talk about money going out, I always go high. I just think that that's smart conservative budgeting. So that $400,000 is low. Someone that we use as liaison with the state estimated that number could go as high as $500,000 or $600,000. We currently are not getting that because we don't do that. So one of the changes in our structure is to add capacity to be able to build those and to make sure our programs have the essential pieces to them to make them billable. We talked here anyway about things not being mutually exclusive. So you can't bill for that thing unless you have the teacher, the direct support beyond the teacher, and a clinical support. You have those pieces, you can start to meet certain criteria and things can be billed if you, again, do the documentation, follow through and submit it. Without those pieces, we're not able to do that. So what we've done here to generate that revenue for our district is we've created a structure that allows for those pieces and to have capacity to do the billing. And if you see the where, that comes in as revenue. And so that factors on our revenue sheet as a $400,000 item, that's the money coming in. Again, we currently don't have that. So this is how we offset things that we want to do. The third line item down is outplacement tuition costs, but avoided. And so when we change things programmatically internally, we can send less students out. And there's a couple of different components to this, but we believe with these transitions, we can create about 40 additional spots for students to stay home and get the services they need without sending them elsewhere. We're still going to have students outplaced, plenty of them. We have near 50 right now that are on a wait list to be outplaced, that the people that provide these services, they have a full house or they're short staffed. And so there's a challenge there. So we program as best we can in-house or through other means, but that's a cost avoided of at least $1.5 million. I need you to understand that if those students, if a spot opens up at an outplacement and they give us a call, we get to send that kid. And that 1.5 includes tuition and some transportation costs. If we don't have a spot for them and spots open up, they have to go. We've looked at past budget actuals and we've seen massive overruns in this particular area. So we want to grow our capacity within. And you can see where that's avoided costs. So you can't put your finger on it in the budget as far as outplacement tuition goes to that extent, But if we don't do it, we're on the hook for whatever those seats cost. So it informs our decisions. Again, the mention of the 35 reduced positions from the audit work, those are just cuts. And that's $1.335 million. So for many years, we've talked about, well, what kind of savings can we have from these audits? There's your savings. But I have to be upfront with you that we have to reinvest to make sure that we're not underserving our kids. And underserving our kids in a legal way, which I think is very important. It's one thing to not like your math teacher. It's another thing to not get your specially designed instruction. There's due process, there's legal fees, there's lawsuits. We need to make sure we provide the services. Notwithstanding, we want to, because they're our kids and that's what we want to do. So you see a total there. And then the next line down is the cost of new items proposed. Those you will see in your local articles. So in your Article 2, your additions, this is what you see there. There's $1.5 million in additions. So I did at the very bottom, the savings after the new structure cost, again, with conservative revenue estimates, is $1.8 million that we're not asking for. So that's the savings. I clicked, it's just taking its time. I don't know why it does that. Yeah, right. Yeah, I don't know why it does that. It started last meeting. I'm tempted to click again. I've got some tabs open, yeah. I always do. Article 3, that's your tech center. So right over here, we have everything from welding to healthcare, construction, culinary, great programming. Just as a reminder, we function as a region. So we serve 5 other area schools, including our own to make up 6. The only changes you see there are salary and benefits. And then you have some, again, the returning of supplies and obviously raw materials right now from a supplies perspective. I'm sure Director Callahan would like to have all of those supplies replenished. Again, we've left 25% in the federal funds. Pretty straightforward article. Article 4, that lands as other instruction. Really pretty straightforward here is salary and benefits increases, but you should see that we moved from Article 7, the athletic director position and the associated costs with the assistant director. Those were placed in the wrong article by rule with the state, and so those have been moved. So that's one of those examples I mentioned. I think it was 128,000 as one of those items that pops up as, hey, is that new? When it's a correction as to where it's placed and not a new ask. Article 5, student and staff support. Again, salary and benefits. We have instructional specialists that were not in the FY22 budget document that were approved by the school committee. There's some 504 additions. 504, I say this carefully, kind of a parallel to an IEP or a special education plan, but 504s are really built around a student's typically physical or medical limitations that prevent them from accessing school like maybe some others would. And so we're looking to program for that effectively. We have several hundred 504 plans in our district, and we have found some cost savings in our high school staff that was taking on 504s at the high school, also assisting with the middle school. So it took a load off of teachers and also was able to be done for about the same amount of money. And so we're looking to expand that model. Certification system support. There's a number of things that are connected to certification that teachers have to have, mentors, things like that. And so those things are itemized in Article 5. And this is that national board detail move from Article 1 to Article 5, pulled out of salaries. This is where it actually belongs. So you see that stipend shift in Article 5. I should go back because I said certification system support. New teachers get mentors and those mentors get stipends. It's a mandate by law. And so we have to account for that. When we have significant amount of new staff, we have to account for their mentors and the stipends associated with the mandate of them having a mentor. I just want to make sure you have that detail for certification. Article 6, system administration. As probably you all know, there was a change in the charter by way of referendum that adjusted compensation for the school committee. That's reflected here. We finally have a fully staffed business and I want to say HR office, but Kim, one of our favorites, has just shared that she's relocating with her family to the south where she has a job opportunity, but also wants to be closer to family because she's got a new little one. So Kim was here with us for a little bit, but she will be missed. So almost fully staffed. Legal fees, all of our dues and contracts, we're seeing uptick. So as the inflation is hitting us and all the aspects of our life, we're seeing this tuition cost has gone up and this contract has gone up and your dues and your fees for all the things that we are associated with all have these upticks. So that's reflected. You also see some corrections to reflect actual expenditures. At times we'll use numbers that are, if we hired a teacher in the middle of the road and considered their benefits, we would put them at this. And so we use that lump sum number when we do our budgeting for positions that are open. But these are corrections using actuals. This is a shift from years past where we use some of those lump sum items for the number of positions. And again, from a budgeting from the ground up, that just didn't feel right. So we use the actuals to build out those budgets as actual expenditures, high or low, love them or hate them, they're actuals. They're not just fabricated numbers. We have some city costs. We shared some tax software, admin salary, just percentages, smaller things. We share some workplace compliance resources. The debt service moved from facilities in Article 9 for LCIP items. That's an adjustment because some of those LCIP items had nothing to do with the article where they were placed. So again, that's a correction. Article 7, school admin. This is where you can see the assistant director and the assistant, those items, that 128,000 that was moved to Article 4, salary and benefits. Student transportation, pretty straightforward, except for one piece. We have a multi-year contract with Hudson or Student Transportation of America. We are in year 2 of that contract. There's some changes in cost there. But there's also a correction. So we have a director of nutrition transportation. She does both areas, but we're billing way too much of a percent one way and then very little the other way. And so this is just a correction. Half her work is transportation and half is nutrition. This is a correction too, based on federal meal program subsidy and how that works. We can't overcharge or undercharge that area based on reimbursement. And so this is, again, getting things right and being accurate. And then you see a massive cost in out of district, and that's students who need a ride to go elsewhere. It's incredibly expensive for specialized transportation to travel for us as far as Saco daily to and from. Multiple rides that travel very far out of our city. That cost adds up in a hurry. Article 9, that's our facilities and maintenance. There's some corrections and really just inflation and trying to be mindful of utilities. It doesn't hit us the way it hits people residentially because we have some locks in place that are multi-year. But every other piece that's not locked in has a cost to it. Article 10 is debt service. That reduces as we pay down principal. One bill that I'm proud to have is the expansion, which we will talk about more on Thursday, the 24th. That starts at 5 p.m. We'll make sure that city councilors, because I know you have a very busy budget. You want to do this one? We have a very busy budget season right now for both parties. So we're going to make sure you have a tour available right at 5. If you come in shortly after that, you could jump into the tour, but we'd really like you to see the space. And that referendum decision that was made by our community and supported has really turned into a beautiful facility that our entire community can use. We're very proud of it. So we started paying bills on that and some other items, and you can see our debt service is reducing, and I'd like to stay in that trend where we can. Article 11, under all other, this is like one of those really ironic articles. There's a crossing guard in there because we have to, the way we have to get invoiced for it, it lands in Article 11. It's $29,000. It's the only item in that article. And that's where it lands. So some value added in this budget. Just want to talk about some of the hard work I think we're doing, but I also want to share some kudos to the team. Karen is assistant superintendent, Bill's over there. He's in charge of operations, Sue over here and teaching and learning, and behind her, Adam, who's our controller. All our administrators, staff, Kirsten's over there, special education. Our principals, directors, there's a lot of people doing a lot of hard work, but in this budget, we did some things pretty differently. And I think we improve instruction systematically, which I think we know we need. We improve our special education structure. We improve programming, and this is a direct result of audit work. And we found a way to pay for it within by reducing those 35 positions that generates both savings and pays for changes. We maintain pathways to graduation that are not the typical pathways for students. We maintain our effort toward equity, social, emotional, and coping skills development. And I still think that what I've seen and what I'm hearing people say about the direction of our school system, we've generated further stability and improved communication. People are coming to Lewiston Public Schools. That we're starting to see them apply here from elsewhere. We're hiring those folks. It is a shift in how things have gone many years prior. So I feel good about the value added in this budget while also finding areas to reduce. So I think the big thing for me or for us next is really about takeaways. I want to answer any questions you may have, look at lines you may have questions about or different areas. But I'd also like to walk away tonight at some point after we do questions with any additional questions you have and really just some next steps. One of the things that happened last year that was very difficult because of COVID, I think, we weren't able to sit in a room together with binders and look through some things and take our time to ask good questions. That's nobody's fault. It's just a reality that we lived. But part of that process is, I think, when we came before City Council with our proposed budget that had been approved by the school committee, there just wasn't that dialogue yet. And again, I think that's about COVID. I'm really hopeful to have a healthy dialogue tonight and answer any questions you have. And really get some direction on where we want to be next steps so that when this comes back around before you, after the school committee does some more work, you have something before you that you feel like can be weighed with your good judgment and something that you could consider. So with that, I just open it up to questions, concerns, comments. If we can't answer it tonight, we'll find you the answer and get it back to you.
Well, the silence is deafening. Councillor Lachapelle.
First of all, thank you for having us here tonight. I look forward. I did send a few questions earlier to you today. You answered a couple of them during the presentation. One of the questions that we had, and I know we're looking at on the city council level, is because we're looking at a reval on property taxes, looking at 23, 24, Administrator Hunter?
Probably 24, 25.
24, 25, knowing that we're going to have to come in at a zero increase. Has that come into play at all in looking at your future budgets? I know you're working on 23 right now, but in the back of your mind, particularly when I look at the added building cost on your LC, thank you. That's what I was trying to say. LCIP. And how is this all going to come into play?
I think it's a great question, and thank you for your email. You laid out a handful of, I thought, very good, thoughtful questions. I sent a reply back, and it really spurred some thinking for me. The LCIP fund request that steps out multiple years. And I think there's a piece in 24, maybe 25, if I remember correct. I think we put 18 million in each year with a total of 36, with an idea that as we start up our 6 through 8 building committee. So this, going back in time a little bit, there's some theory that with our elementary schools being so full and at pretty max capacity in most places, if you had 6th, 7th, and 8th, you might benefit the student experience having 3 years instead of 2 in the middle school. Problem is you can't put 6th graders in the middle school because that building is full and at capacity. So then people started talking about an idea of what if we had 6, 7, and 8 and we acquired a different space? And this started to come up back when ESSER funds were starting to come in, different titles for different stages of COVID funding. And the initial report was that you might be able to use some of these funds for property, whether it was long-term lease or potential purchase, if you were meeting the definition of creating more space because of COVID and mitigation. Well, that turned out, and we looked at some properties. Heather and I had some conversations kind of offline a while back, but it ended up being that you couldn't do that with the funds. Problem is people started thinking about it. And so I had some inquiries cross my desk about, hey, what are we going to do with that? I really would like to pursue that, even if we don't have the federal funds to use. There's still talks about infrastructure funds that again, we're going to look to maximize everything we can for Lewiston. Long way of getting to your question. What is that money? What is that for? So the thinking is looking at things like the Lewiston Police Department model, where it was, you knew you had a need. We're out of space at Dingley. The building itself needs about $4+ million in repair to be functional, but it's already out of space. We're already using cubicles for people that need to have private conversations in places like HR that don't have the space they need to do that. And so between the cost of Dingley, that we're out of space at Dingley, and this 6, 7, 8 model, looking at how do we project out beyond the current year, and as we talk about these things in a design subcommittee, what could it cost, and when's the right time to start having that conversation if this thing grows some legs under it? And so that's why we proposed it in the LCIP. It could be, we'd like to do a study to make sure that it's viable, do the committee work to see if it's something this community wants to support, or at least try to get support for. And then do we rent, do we lease, do we look for something to build, or do we do none of the above? And so that was the reason for the LCIP request of big amounts a couple years out.
Thank you. How is this going to have, how adversely is this going to affect your day-to-day budget, trying to come in at a 0 increase for 2 years?
Realistically, it'll be people. It'll be teachers in classrooms. Because of contractual increases, if we're asking to be at a 0% budget over multiple years, we've already underfunded and reduced the contractual growth that is in collective bargaining agreements.
Mr. Linus.
Thank you. I have a question and then a couple comments about the special education. So when I was looking at the staff, the student staff ratio, one of the things that jumped out at me was your middle school and the number of staff there in proportion to the students. And you talked earlier about how your business and your HR offices, well, except for one, is fully staffed. Are those numbers just reflective of vacancies that you have unfilled? Is that why there's such a disparity there in that grid?
I mean, some of it is vacancies. I think other portions, at least at the middle school, is they have that teaming model. And so students stay in a pretty close geographic area. So your staffing ratios can be a little bit different. The other thing that came up for us is we had 4 positions that were for ELMS, which in the first year of COVID, when we did the hybrid model, we had this online version of middle school. It was successful. Kids really enjoyed it. The staff seemed to enjoy it. And then through the attrition of kids coming back to school full-time, I don't know if attrition is the right word, but we found that there was much less interest and we were unable to hire those positions. And whether it was I'll call it my decision, we got to a point where we have so many unfilled positions in our schools that I wasn't going to fund people who didn't come to work every day to teach students who are not coming to school. So that example, but there's 4 positions there that we didn't move on because it made sense to, if we got applicants, that we put them in our schools so we could have school in person.
Thank you. Another question. When I look at Article 8, transportation, I think about how that must line up with your special education. So when you talk about, your drivers going out to Saco or wherever they're going for outplaced tuition students, I guess I would expect to see that number. That surprised me. That wasn't, when I think about like what you put forth when you talked about special education and some of the reductions and the added revenue by billing main care for the special education services. I mean, those are great, great things. But I would have expected that the transportation would have been more in line with those changes. Does that make sense?
It does. And we have, this is part of a few things. One is that conservative budgeting model. I don't want to claim savings until they're there. We've got 50 students on a waiting list right now that if a spot opened up tomorrow, they would go. Whether we could program for many more kids year to year in our own programs is one thing. But until that savings is realized, I didn't want to earmark it in a reduction in an expenditure because I think we have those costs and those costs will grow. But when we talk about the costs avoided being a savings that you can't go point out in the book, that's where that $1.5 million in tuition and transportation comes from is really around that. It's about on average $50,000 per student to have them go to school elsewhere. And we have over 100 of them currently. And we have a waiting list of again, about 50. And so between programming in-house, I think some of it will be a bit of a wash too. There may be some kids we can program for here once we have things stood up that could come back. But there's other kids we still can't program for either because we don't have the capacity or we don't have that kind of program. They're still going to go. So there's kind of both happening. So I just wanted to be careful of that transportation cost so we didn't get hit with a surprise.
Thank you.
Ms. Bowden.
Thank you. I guess I have a question for the city councilors. I'm not sure if this is like an open conversation type of setting, but when the councilors take a look at our budget and you see what our numbers are, how are you feeling about the percentage that we've come out at? And did you guys have something in mind? I'm just curious because I don't want to see what happened last year happen again.
Just for myself, we just got this Friday. So this was our weekend reading. So this is our first opportunity to look at it. Obviously, I fell off my chair when I saw a $36 million addition and you see these numbers coming in and they're high, no question about it. I guess I'd almost reverse it back to the school committee, say, what can we do to help you make a better school? What can we do to help you to get our test scores up? What is needed? Is it needed more time in school? Is it needed that pupils being in the seats more? We've heard great information from our school board representative about the special education. We're excited on that. But like everything else, everybody's number crunching. We realize there's a 60% increase in electricity. There's a fuel cost increase. So you have some fixed expenses that we can't get away from. Because this weekend I came up with like $1 million in savings right off, but the superintendent explained to me why there's $130,000 for a new, yes, for some of the positions that were just allocated differently. So we haven't had really a chance to look into it. Some of the big questions are, what are the plans to increase our test scores within the school system? How can we help? Is the school year long enough? Some real basic stuff. At the same time, keeping in mind the cost of operating all of this. So
I think that's sound input. And I guess I want to commend the school committee too, because those $2 million worth of cuts were not easy to make decisions on. They're making some tough decisions. And I don't want to speak for them, but I think it's been a pretty clear and consistent message that we still have more work to do. one of the things that I'm challenged with, I put it up on the early slide. Our contractual steps, our insurance projection. Again, we'll know more about that Friday. That, I mean, I may not sleep Thursday night, or maybe I will if the results come out, because if that comes in higher than 12%, it's an instant increase. And if it comes in less than, okay, it's some things that we can grab onto as actual reductions, or maybe even really big actual reductions. But those pieces being said, just when you look at a contract and what step a person is on and what their raises collectively bargained, and you look at that projection at 12% for benefits, it's $7.4 million. We are that big of an organization with over 900 staff. 7.4. Your increase that you have in front of you, and we're not done. I'm thankful for the questions because it makes us think too. But right now we're at 6.2 of an increase. So if our contractual obligations and benefits are 7.4 million, and we're presenting something tonight that we're still working on that 6.2, we've already reduced beyond the things that we have before us as far as programs go. And I think from an added value perspective, because you asked a good question about how does this help with our test scores? How does this help with these pieces? I think it's a comprehensive approach, but I gotta say that the number 1 and 2 things for me, and maybe they're tied, it's that effort to improve special education, and it's the effort to improve instruction. Because the best teaching and learning, no matter what the student's ability level is going to impact their test scores. And we still struggle with some opt-out things, but those are some parent right components. But to me, that's how we get better. That's how we get better. And good people are staying here because they love it here. And good people are coming here because they're intrigued about what we're doing. But that costs money. And I don't think we're being frivolous. I mean, we're still negotiating a contract with our teachers. A lot of hard work's gone into that, but they've operated off of no contracts in September. And that work continues to go on. And I think it's because everyone's trying to be as responsible as they can.
Councillor Clement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To chime in with Councillor Lachapelle, we have just received our budget. We've had one workshop. We're looking at a $4.08 increase in taxes. And that came as sticker shock. We got this last Friday, so double sticker shock in a week. So we haven't had a chance to recover yet. We are also entering into contract negotiations this year with 2 of our units, I believe. Just one? Okay, one will be after July, I believe. So we have many of the same problems, and we know that for the last 2 years, we have managed to reduce the tax rate 41 cents in each of 2 years. Now we're looking at a $4.08 increase. So we have to consider the fact that a lot of people are going to be having sticker shock if we come into that. Thank you.
Ms. Scott.
Thank you. So I just want to follow up on all that was just said. And I just think it's really important. So here we are together again for the first time in 2 years, right? That we actually get to sit near each other, talk to each other. And I think that we need to take advantage of this because this will quell, in my hope, in my opinion, what happened over the last 2 years, having these conversations, right? As we move forward and city council meets tomorrow night and city council meets on Thursday, speak to your colleague. It would be my opinion. Speak to who your city council member is and who the school committee member is, and make sure we're having those conversations as we're looking at lowering those numbers and saying, you know, if we're looking at $1.35 now, we'll say on the school committee side, and we still haven't even started talking about what we're doing on the city side. We need to continue with having those conversations to make sure that both of us understand on both sides when we're talking, okay, the city council really is looking at, we've got to drop this down by $2.50, the overall budget will say. And I'm just using that as an example. We need to make sure we're having that conversation so we don't get to the point like last year where we have a no vote. I hope that, and I'm not fearful of that. I think that we can all still work through that if that were to happen. But I'm hoping that we can have those conversations prior to getting to that point in the next, 3 weeks from now that we have that we're open to those discussions. And as things are moving forward, I will continue to talk about at each spot, as I have been, what the conversation has been, what we're thinking, what happened at that meeting, and welcome any of you to reach out to me And I'll help facilitate some of those questions and stuff too. So thank you.
Councilor Clement.
Thank you. Just for figuring purposes, so people will understand where we're at. Every penny on the tax rate equates to $21,200. So if you want to remove 1 cent from the tax rate, you got to find 21,200. So that's just for arithmetic purposes, I guess.
Yeah, it's 1.05 million for 50 cents. We've been looking.
We're obviously we're a much larger department, many more employees, and we have Bill 8 bargaining units. Yeah, we have 8. No, I think with the tech, I think it's 8. It's 8 bargaining units, and I think we have 4 of them coming up, including the teachers one, which is the largest one, which we've been working on since we started working on the teachers one in February of a year ago. And it has not concluded yet. So it's been challenging. COVID certainly did not help matters any. One of the things we're trying to do, and of course, at the legislature, we're not blaming anybody, but there was a mandatory increase of minimum teacher salary. We had been around $36,000, and that mandatory minimum for any teacher is now $40,000. That was just, this is a cutoff date, you will. And the unfortunate piece of that is, of course, that if it's hard to attract new teachers to come here when we're exactly the same as every other place. They could go regardless of where it is. They can go to Farmington, or they could go to, Cornville, and they're still going to get paid $40,000 a year because that's a state mandated minimum now. And they're not really, the state isn't helping us really fund it. They're just saying you will. So there are instances like that, which are driving our salary lines, which again, talk about fuel costs and things like that. There are all those mandates that we have we have zero control over. And what that did is when that happened, it took our entire salary scale and moved it. Virtually every single position moved up because the bottom moved up. Yes, I know. It's the unfunded mandate. So the salary line has been really challenging. That's been part of the challenge that we've had with the negotiations with the teachers union. And, it's because of all those adjustments, and this is just driving, and we still don't have that settled. So the actual cost of that salary line is still not settled. We're hoping to soon, because it would be nice to not end the school year with the teachers having gone an entire school year without a agreement. And it's a 3-year agreement, and we've already blown through most of the first year. So for all that it's a 3-year agreement, it'll probably end up being basically a 2-year agreement, and we'll be right back at it again. So it's challenging, to say the least, and we're working on it. We've had a lot of hard work done here on the committee, and we understand. Believe me, we're all taxpayers here too. We get it, and I think, some of us have the advantage of being senior citizens and realizing what that impact is for folks of our age as well. Not everyone is on the board, but some of us are. So anyway, it is, it's certainly something that we take into account. We don't discount it, so we're working. We really hope that, that the council can give us, and I recognize if you got both of these budgets this weekend, it's a wonder you're here and bleary eyed, but we've had the opportunity to work with ours for a little bit. But we hope that we can get to a place where, I myself, I would be remiss to say that I thought we could get to a 0% budget increase just because of many of the things that happened. But we're going to do the best we can. We still have things that we have to provide our students. They're just, federal mandates and everything else. And we are striving to do our best. But it's a short year between last budget season and this one. And, as things change, it's challenging. So, anyone else? We'd like to have some input from Ms. Jelinas.
Thank you. A lot of times we can look at the special education budget and say, we can't touch that. That's based on legal and binding documents all outlined on an IEP. So there's not a lot of wiggle room, right? But I just want to applaud the committee for the work that you've done in terms of, or the special ed department for that matter, in terms of reinventing some of that service delivery and really looking at, revenue coming in from main care billing. And I believe that number that was put out there for us to review is very conservative. And I believe that, there's a lot of work to be done in that area because some of that billing is being done by contracted providers, as you know. So I feel really optimistic about that. I thought that the numbers presented, like I said, were very conservative. And I get, again, a lot of work being done there. And historically, that's been a service line or a line, I should say, that we kind of look at and we're like, oh, I can't touch that. But you guys have. And so kudos to y'all.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Mayor.
I just wanted to say I appreciate all the hard work of the school committee thus far to identify cost savings and revenue sources. Thank you.
So before we say if there's nothing further, a couple of things, I guess, from me, and just going back to my last slide is really any questions that you have, please feel free to email me. I'll be on the lookout for them. Linda's a great conduit. She gets to me right away. We, as a school committee subcommittee, have a meeting tomorrow, our finance subcommittee, where we'll be looking at things that we've been very detailed about. We get granular with this, and we talk about different ideas. So we're going to meet tomorrow. We're looking at not having a meeting on Wednesday so that we can wait for the insurance premiums to come out, at least the max on, it's supposed to be on the 24th, but again, I'm not going to count those before they hatch for Friday. We would have another meeting the following Wednesday. In that time, we're going to be looking at having factual insurance information and what other reductions that we feel we can responsibly make without leaving our students or our staff in a bad situation. If you have thoughts, even if they're personal, please reach out. If you don't have my number from last time, I can leave it with you. And feel free to give me a call and be as frank with me as you'd like and leave me with some thoughts of, I know that you represent yourself and not as a whole group, but it would be good to know individually where you're at. And several of you have already reached out to me and I've greatly appreciated that. That's very helpful. I can't always just do what it is we're talking about, but it helps to know where the council sits. This process, as you know, is very important. On the 4th, this committee will be looking at, I'm hopeful that we can get through the work we have ahead of us to have them approve something that we can bring to you on April 12th. We'll come to your chambers and present that. And the work between now and then is critical. We really want to make sure we're bringing you something that you can work with and go from that direction. So any further input, questions, and I would agree, just getting this late last week and looking through it, it's a monumental task to get through it. Anyway, we've had a month to do it and we've done it line by line. So you may have something pop up, but please do not hesitate to reach out. I'll give you the best answers I can or find it for you. And again, next steps, we want to know where you want to be. And so we can work toward getting to that place as much as possible.
And I want to take a moment to thank the staff, Jake and Karen, Bill, Sue, and Adam. They've 4,000 lines that they've looked at, that they've reviewed to break this down, to try to find what can we save? Where can we find savings? It's a significant task, to say the least. And this is the 3rd year I've been on the school committee. This is hands down the most thorough analysis and review of the school budget that I have been privy to. And I think those members that have been here longer would agree that this is, this is what what should have been done before. Well, it's being done now. We may be playing catch up to some degree from some other things that happened in our past. We cannot go back and change those. All we can do is try to compensate for them as best we can and learn from those types of mistakes to not repeat them. But this is, we've been through, I guess we did get through all 4,000 lines finally. So we are working hard at this, and it is, I just really want to thank the effort of the staff. Kristen too, I overlooked her. She's, she's been huge. She's our new special ed director. Kirsten, I'm sorry, Kirsten. I see Kristen over there and Kirsten's behind her. But yeah, that's a big job as well, and big budget, but we hope to get there. We'll do what we can. That being said, is there anyone else would like to just weigh in with something? Ms. Hurd.
Thank you. I was hoping to bring some warm weather. That did not happen. So what are next steps? Like, are you going to come to us next Monday and say, these are more cuts that we've made? These are things that we're looking at to cut. These are things like, where do we go from here as we're not having a Wednesday meeting?
So the Wednesday meeting was if needed, and we're really waiting for that insurance number to come through. So we'll meet with the finance subcommittee tomorrow, I believe, right? Tomorrow. So we've already talked about some items that are not in here yet. Some things that I'm a little hesitant about, but I think that group's willing to make some tough decisions and at least to inform the process. So I would anticipate that with that conversation and then knowing more about the insurance numbers, what would happen is, I don't think it's Monday, I believe it's Wednesday. Karen, is that right? The next schedule would be a week from this Wednesday. We'll have additional information, and that'll be informed by the insurance information, the finance subcommittee, and I think a clear will by city and our community to be as absolutely responsible as we can be. But I would anticipate reductions on that day.
Anyone else? Any words of wisdom from Ms. Hunter?
I guess I think it's important to continue to work together and keep that line of communication open. I know Jake and I work pretty well together on bouncing off tax rates and things like that. So I think that would be important. I think both of us are in the same situation where waiting for estimates to be refined, whether it's health insurance numbers. I was joking that I just got state revenue sharing numbers. So, it's those last minute things that are going to make or break. One of the things that I want to walk through with Jake at some point is the capital side of the house, because clearly the LCIP closely follows the adoption of the budget, is just to make sure what excess proceeds are available to carry forward, any bond premium, things like that. So that can be reduced as well. And see if we can get within that, or at least closer to the 80% debt service limit.
One thing I want to add, just from a long-term planning perspective, for the first time, at least since I've been around, we are long-term planning for things. So we're not just looking at these lines, we're looking at how they will equate next year and the costs associated with that. I'd like to give you something this time next year that you start to look at years in advance as much as possible as the current year. We are seeing right now, though, this really big influx of, again, those federal COVID dollars. They will sunset about a year from this coming fall, so 24. So we have some funds that we can cautiously use, and it's not a free-for-all. That has to be approved. We have to apply for it. There's a lot of restrictions, and we, again, have dumped a lot of money into facilities, tens of millions into facilities, HVAC, mechanical, those kinds of things that are not in your LCIP request because we're able to defray what we could. We even explored things like the middle school project that was approved last year to see if we could use ESSER funds for that and leave that money in LCIP or for another purpose. It wasn't allowable because it's a boiler plant system, not HVAC, air side, air quality side of things. And so we're being as thoughtful as we can to save money to keep our buildings up for another 20, 25 years in those instances. But I'm not going to lie if I don't tell you that, I'd be lying if I didn't tell you that this trajectory of small increases, or sometimes not feeling so small increases in salary and benefits, and the community's ability to pay that, paired with the limited amount of increased revenue from the state, paired with this ESSER line that's going down. So in 24, that's a hard stop. And our rates are going to continue to slowly rise. I mean, we have collective bargaining agreements. That's just a reality. We're going to do everything we can to be as sharp as we can. But I do worry collectively, not just us as a school system, but also for the city who has collective bargaining agreements. There's a piece there where that other funding drops off. And if we're not deliberate years in advance, that's going to be a really, really hard year. I think this year's already hard. I can't imagine what that would look like if we were trying to make all these reductions in 24, which would be 1 year from today, talking about FY 24. Trying to be very deliberate about multi-year planning.
Ms. Hunter.
Certainly, there was one thing to echo Councillor Lachapelle's question about the revaluation. I'm not sure how many school committee members understand what that involves. So right now, the overall valuation within the city is reached a level that has reached a level where we have to do a revaluation per state regs. So part of that revaluation, and that's going to be contracted out, there's going to be a shift from commercial and industrial markets to home residential markets. You're seeing that today. If you look at the selling price of real estate versus what it's assessed at, there's a huge gap between those prices. That is a natural shift when a municipality does a revaluation. So to Councillor LaChapelle's point, obviously that's the bulk of our taxpayers that are receiving that shift. So to hold the budget constant, at least that first year when you implement a reval, allows the homeowners to see what the change in the valuation of their residency is related to the actual revaluation versus having multiple changes at the same time, and be able to say, okay, $500 is related to your revaluation. Another $300 is related to the tax rate increase. And so, but you got a credit back from your homestead exemption. So there's like 3 moving parts that's going to happen that year. If we could at least hold one constant during that year and that way it allows everybody to kind of churn through their revaluation questions. It allow for a greater explanation to divide what's happening with that tax shift.
Ms. Eames.
I don't know the answer to this question. Is it rolled out over time, or does it go into effect in a couple of years?
It goes into effect immediately.
Immediately when?
As soon as the revaluation is completed. So right now we are looking at that FY 24, FY 25
for that
timeframe. That's why Councillor Lachapelle was targeting that.
But I mean, there's a lot of prep work, and then at one point it kicks in.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
I guess one of the things that we can also hope to, and is that we were fortunate that the the state last year funded education at that full agree, the 55% that they agreed to, understanding full well that Lewiston has always been funded at a much greater level than that because of our need. What was the number this year? Was
79% that we get, 79% of our budget's funded by way of state subsidy.
We're way in excess of the 55 minimum percent that they have failed to do many years because of budgets. With the new budget, projections that they're making up in Augusta, one would only hope that, maybe there would be some of that would trickle back to our community and either in the homestead portion of it or in additional school funding. They ended up with a $1.2 billion surplus the other day that they are hoping to disperse. So there may be a glimmer of hope there somewhere, although, coming out of this pandemic has certainly changed everything for everybody. And the need is greater and we're working, we're trying. So I didn't really mean to put you on the spot, Heather. I just,
It's okay.
you were sitting in the back of the room like, the good school kid that, Anything else? If there's nothing else, I guess I would call for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Whitlow and
Second.
seconded by Ms. Bowden. All in favor? So moved. We are adjourned.